once more.
Yeah.
I mean, tell us the
think
side of Jennifer
yeah.
that really wants to see the change, and specifically, you know, if we were to put up a list, 10 ways creatives can get more involved in improving civic systems, which is something Tom talks about regularly and that we consider. Where do we want to go with this? I'm impatient, you can probably tell, and I think we shouldn't be wasting opportunities to make real progress. And I see the kind of work that you're doing as critical to reawakening and strengthening our identity as actual human beings, rather than, you know, to put it bluntly, drones in some economic system that's trying to get us to consume and, you know, be good little children of the system. So I'm interested. What would you have people do? I mean, how could we, on this show and as we keep talking about, maybe have other guests, how can we help teach people what is possible and how important it is for them to take these opportunities?
So one easy way is to participate in your local boards and councils and committees and commissions. Mm-hmm. So if you live in a town, you can apply to be a town meeting member. You can collect signatures for that. You can serve on your local historic commission, your local arts council, there are many commissions and committees at the city and town levels that artists can get involved with.
Is that something that you perhaps might help them do? Like if I were an artist and I said, I want to do this, but I have no idea, is there a chance you might have a clearinghouse of information? Like, you could do this, you could do that. Or is that
No, that is not something that we offer, and I don't know if there's anyone in the state right now that's offering that kind of connection for the creative community. Possibly Mass Creative, that could be something that they grow to do.
That's interesting.
I think that's not something they explicitly devote their lean resources to, but that would be interesting. What would it look like to create a guide to getting active in civic life for artists? Yeah. But you know, if I were to step aside a moment to not just speak to artists, I think that some of the ideas that my team tries to raise through our project work is to help regular citizens and residents who are not artists imagine how much they gain from inviting more creative thinking into the design and development of public places and spaces. So I think there are some things that are happening in the Seaport that are interesting and good. So for example, Grub Street is going to have a home to expand their services as a writing organization, an organization supporting literary arts in the Seaport. I think there has also been an invitation for a collective of African American artists in Boston to also create space in the Seaport. So I think there are a few examples where there have been cultural spaces that have probably been, included through their community benefits negotiations with the developers. But I think there's a lot left to be desired in terms of the public realm, public access design of the waterfront, quite frankly. So even a cultural institution that's on the waterfront now has been fined by conservation law and called out by Conservation Law Foundation because of the lack of public access. That their cultural institution has actually had a role in closing off because of the cultural events that they hold that are, by ticket, when really it's all public. It's all intended to be public access to the waterfront. So, I'd say it's a complex conversation. We could spend a whole other hour talking about.
Well, we'll try to arrange that.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts?
So one of the themes that has emerged from the show that's really encouraging to me is this concept of solidarity, that we're all in this together. And in order to really build towards and create the world we want, we have to get people on the same page, and we have to get them thinking about long-term problem solving. I think a lot of the current media paradigm focuses on sensationalism and short-term issues. So I'm curious how you, from a planning perspective, urban planning, culturally, artist, creativity-wise, how do you get ordinary citizens, everyone in the community, on board for a 5, 10, 15, 20-year long project where they can't necessarily see tomorrow the benefits, but you're confident and deep down as an organization, the people you talk to, that this is going to truly benefit everyone, that this is the community we want to create, this is the art in the community we want to create, this is a system we need to create.
So I am an artist who has remained in the field of urban planning, and I continue to remain in, even though I have a lot of conflicts about the system in which I work. It's about rules and regulations and norms. And it's the long game. So what I would say to people is, if you're kind of doubting, what is the impact of the urban planning field on arts and culture, or in general on community life, I would say it's not unlike other aspects of government where all of this work depends on the quality of the thinking and the kinds of people who make themselves invested in the process. So you have to show up. So run for office, participate in the local planning process, serve on a committee. This is how we strengthen and build social capital locally and regionally. And I think that's so important. And I think arts and culture is also about building the cultural capital of place.
Two of the quick words just to finalize that thought is I loved you using the terms smart growth and livability. I've seen you use that. How do those words resonate with you in terms of building sustainable long-term solutions and getting people involved?
I'm interested in the livability framework because I think that's where it creates a big entry point for arts and culture to have equal respect at the table alongside other planning issues. Livability is how do you take care of the physical and social infrastructure of place? I think that's where arts, culture, and creativity really helps expand how government and planners and community developers in particular think about taking care of the social and human infrastructure.
Can we just jump in? I mean, we've talked a lot about equity on this show, and we think it's a really important concept for people to wrestle with, particularly those who may not have given it much thought because of their own backgrounds and privilege. So I understand you have some reservations about it, but how would you encourage people to think about it, given that it can take on this buzzword quality and maybe lose its impact?
I think that we need to always adapt our messaging and language based on the audiences that we're engaging. So I would bring it down to the experience, questions of like people's lived experience. So say, for example, if I was trying to motivate a really overworked parent to come out for a public meeting on a climate adaptation project. And they might be considered in the eyes of a planner as being from an environmental justice community. To say that to a person is a kind of a non-starter. Like, what would motivate them to want to participate? How can they see themselves in this process? Like, what will be the impact on their lived experience? So I think for folks who are trying to do diversity and inclusion work, it's more important to engage people in an appreciative inquiry kind of way, like asking them questions about their lived experience and trying to make connections with the issues that you aim to create space for through whatever that project is that has to do with advancing equity.
We had Dr. Tia Martin on the show, who was the Chief Resilience Officer for Boston, working on the intersection of climate impacts on low-income communities and the question of social resilience. So she actually, uniquely among a huge Rockefeller program that gave money to 100 different cities, strongly linked the need to address racism head on, because as one of the things she said, crises or public emergencies reveal failures that have been there for a long time. And secondly, that a desire for equity and for engagement can turn into a kind of drive-by consultation, ignoring the depth of experience, the complexity of experience that people go through. And so I think that's something that I'm pleased that I see this bubbling up, but I don't see it yet really drawn into the structures of power, who still are very tightly and self-congratulatory about their own skills. So do you have, we're spreading into bigger topics that really have to go to the heart of democracy and how we participate. If I can go on for one more second, I have a very dear friend, Frances Moore LePay, who's written a lot of books, recently one on daring democracy, and she talks about a cycle of disempowerment where people feel they're not being heard and they don't know how to participate. That reinforces the idea it's not worth participating. So they kind of set a tone of being frustrated, and then they communicate to their networks, this is all worthless. And so how do you reverse that? And I think we've touched on that. I'm not expecting you to answer that here. But there is a desire to help people re-engage and feel, and create the world that we want. And so maybe you could comment a little bit about that, because I hear you saying we need people to engage. And I think the world of art has that special imaginative freedom that I think we're especially in need of at a time when a lot of that's being squeezed out of us.
Yeah, and I'd say, the field of planning is guilty for doing a lot of process that may not necessarily result in any meaningful impact on the decisions that are made and the outcomes.
That's so interesting. What do you mean by that? Just help us understand.
So
I've seen that.
Yeah, I guess I would say what I would think is worth focusing on is developing systems of accountability. So it's kind of understood that those of us who are running public process run our processes in a way that is laden with our own personal bias, whether or not we are aware. So that means there are certain norms around how we do things when we hold meetings, whether or not we offer people food or childcare. It's laden with multiple languages, right? Regardless of where we are situated. It's true also for the arts and cultural community. We're all guilty of this. So I think what's important is how do you create systems of accountability within government or within any community process that ensure that you're sort of creating checks for yourself to see, okay, we've gotten to this point, we have this plan with these strategies, or we have this draft policy. Being transparent about sharing where you are and inviting critical feedback. I think one of the best things we can do is to invite critical feedback from the communities we say we want to be accountable to.
A little bit to bring up the last question of long-term problem solving. I saw that you're also interested in social movements. I'm curious if you've had any experience, lessons from, you've seen movements being built, if there's any movements in particular you're very interested in the moment that whether our guests can contribute energy to, whether any questions you have for our guests that can potentially contribute energy towards movements, but just the concept of movements. What lessons have you learned? What movements have you seen that have particularly inspired you? Are there any movements out there right now that you're particularly passionate about lending energy towards?
Sure. I guess I would say I admire the Me Too movement. I admire the Black Lives Matters movement. Those are the two that really come to mind the most. And I would agree with your previous speaker, Atia, that we need to sort of head-on address issues of race and white supremacy and how that plays out also in our movements. And how do we hold ourselves accountable as folks from different demographics that are trying to be in community.
And talking about all these movements that are taking place and revealing deep, but for a long time, hidden injustices and brutality, and some rooted in white supremacy or male dominance or the failure to confront fundamental wealth inequity. Obviously, that has implications for engaging the arts and community planning, and it's a huge topic, but maybe you could help us understand what we could investigate in the future about these connections.
Sure. Well, I guess I would say broadly speaking, the arts and cultural field faces the same power issues as any other field does. The amplification of certain cultural and artistic traditions and practices over others, like we can think about the colonial history in Massachusetts versus Native American history in Massachusetts. This is deep. So to hold space for meaningful dialogue on any of these issues does require some bravery from a lot of leadership, I think, cultural leadership in Massachusetts. I'd say in terms of our work, my team's work at the city and town level, we are trying through our historic and cultural resources planning work and through our cultural planning work and through our creative placemaking work to really create space for communities to acknowledge that difference in power and amplification of specific arts and cultural traditions and experiences. So we do that in part by encouraging people to really hone in on what are the values that's motivating them wanting to do this work, thinking about the who, the people that they want to engage through this work, that they feel have been marginalized or have not been a part of arts and cultural life in a certain part of a community. So all of this arts and cultural work is inherently about power and access.
And the narrative we bring to how things came to be.
Right.
And in what manner they should be altered or perpetuated.
It's coming up right now in the monuments conversation that a lot of communities are having around,
And the whole renaming debate. All
right,
of that.
deaccessioning of work. So, all of this gets, into
Right.
serious, deep issues.
Yeah.
It's not light stuff.
Yeah, well,
So one of my last questions here is, are there any projects in 2019 or beyond that really fire you up, that you're passionate to be contributing to? And then if you have any questions for our audience
or ways
to
that we can
contribute.
help.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. We
ways
want to
that we
help
can
you
help.
Sure.
contribute
Great
energy
question.
towards whatever you're most passionate about now.
This spring, this year, our agency kicked off Metro Common, which is our planning process to develop the next regional plan. So it's Metro Common 2050. So the website, I believe, is mapc.metrocommon2050.org. So we encourage people to get involved. We are in the process of developing the overarching themes and goals for the plan, and we will be developing and announcing a series of committees of community members who will help advise on the development and implementation of our work within each of these goal categories. So one of them will most likely pertain to arts, culture, and heritage. So we are actively inviting folks who live within 495 in the Metro Boston region to be very involved in the planning process to help shape that plan. So the hope is, the language that is in the plan will also help inform planning at the city and town level. So we as a regional agency, we are advisory. So communities don't have to implement the plan, but what's exciting about a planning process is the building of social capital that happens through the process. So over the next 2 years, we hope to bring in new voices and new people into civic life that we hope will have ripple effects at the local level.
Well, Jen, I just want to thank you on behalf of Tom and me and our team here and all the people who are now starting to sign up and watch, and for your insight, for your commitment. We would love for you to think of us as a resource, and that maybe we can have additional conversations about this. Maybe there's some way we can draw attention to that Metro Common plan. So thank you very, very much for coming and for being brave and bold and laying out some of the things that obviously are critical to our future.
Amazing. This has been an amazing conversation. It's really emboldened us to keep trying to have these conversations. So thank you for diving in with us. And I just want to give a special thank you to CIC, whose mission is to fix the world through innovation, for hosting us in this amazing space at Lighthouse here at 50 Milk Street. Our mission as a community here is to articulate, analyze, and build towards the future we want together. So we need your help. So reach out to us, let us know if you think there's issues that we should be touching on, if there's guests you think would really align with these types of conversations, and we really thank you for listening.